In this video, I'm going to show you the best traps in the Queen's Gambit. There you go. That's the opening on the board. White is attacking black's center. So what I'm going to show you here is really essential knowledge if you play the Queen's Gambit with white or you're defending it as black. You have to know this stuff. It's part of your basic chess education. So first of all, I'm going to show you the elephant trap. Now, why it's called the elephant trap, I have absolutely no idea. If someone knows, then do let me know right in the comments. So white was putting pressure on that pawn in the middle, and black declines the gambit and just bolsters that pawn in the middle. Very sensible. And white continues developing, and black brings out the king's knight. Actually, I'm going to flip it around. I'm going to look at it from black's viewpoint because black sets the trap here. So bishop comes out to g5. This is very sensible and standard Queen's Gambit developing move. The bishop comes out before you play the pawn forward, so the bishop doesn't get locked in, and sets up this pin. And here black can play several moves. Bishop e7 is pretty normal. Knight d7 is also a good move. And here normal moves, knight f3, pawn to e3. But white can be tempted to take that pawn in the middle. Let's see what happens. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Everything fine. And now white can attempt to exploit this pin here by playing knight takes pawn. Blunder! It looks like white is winning a pawn because you think, well, knight takes knight isn't possible because you can take the queen, but black can take that knight. White takes the queen, and now here is the point. Black has this very sneaky check. Bishop b4, check. The king has nowhere to move, so the queen has to block. Black takes the queen with check, that's important. King takes bishop. King takes bishop. Now after that flurry of captures, if we just look at the material balance, you'll see that black is actually one piece up. He's got one more minor piece than white. So a piece up, that should be a winning position for black. Now, I've known about this trap since I was a kid, and the reason is that my brother fell into this trap as white in one of the first junior tournaments that we played. The funny thing is, he actually won the game a piece down. So all's well that ends well. But anyway, yeah, it certainly still makes me laugh, that story. But here we go. So that's our first trap. Okay, let's go back to this position. Again, this Queen's Gambit decline position and knight d7. And okay, trap number 2 I'm going to show you takes place in a variation of the Queen's Gambit declined called the Cambridge Springs variation. Now, I do know why this one is called the Cambridge Springs. So white is developing normally. I mean, this is the absolutely standard setup for the Queen's Gambit. White is preparing to bring the bishop here and get castled on the king side. Absolutely normal. This move, Queen a5, is the Cambridge Springs variation. Now, this is named after a tournament where it was played for the first time that took place in 1904 in Cambridge Springs in the United States. Now, let's have a look. This queen move is very, very sneaky. You can see it pins that knight here. So that sets up all kinds of interesting possibilities with this pin putting more pressure on the knight and maybe throwing this knight in here as well. And there's also something else about this queen move which is very clever. So let's suppose that white plays an absolutely normal developing move. Bishop here. Seems fine. White is ready to castle. Aha. Let's see what we can do. In fact, there's two ways we can try and spring this trap. Let's play pawn takes pawn. bishop takes pawn, and knight to e4, exploiting that pin. So there is pressure here. So white defends that, but then here we go. We've got knight takes bishop. And you can see that that queen defends the knight laterally, and black is a piece up. Now, lateral queen moves are some of the hardest moves to spot in chess psychologically, and so many players have fallen into this trap. I think one of the difficulties is that somehow white is lulled into thinking, well, this is the real danger, and forgets that there is something going on across the board, particularly when this pawn is kind of solidly in the middle. Of course, white doesn't actually need to sort of fall for that hook, line and sinker, but you know, it does happen. After this, of course, you can just move the bishop. You can move it here, but, well, black wins a pawn. In fact, it doesn't quite win a piece. There's a check, and you're threatening to take the bishop, but knight d2 defends. But black is a pawn up here. That's a good outcome from the opening. And there's another way that black can try and spring this trap, which is to play knight e4 straight away. Threat to take here, and after queen c2, then you take on g5, and you take here. And there you go. You've seen that before. So that's another one. Of course, white can avoid this by doing this. Now, not knight d2. Once again, we can take this, but by playing knight e5, and actually white can get away with that. But, okay, that's another story. But very often, white gets into trouble here. Let me show you another one. This isn't quite as dramatic, but if white, for example, exchanges here, knight takes, but there's pressure here, so white defends, the bishop comes out, pinning, so pressure on this knight, rook here, and you've won a pawn exploiting this pin. And, well, you can exchange off pieces and get to an endgame where black is a pawn up. That is a very useful extra pawn. So there we go, the Cambridge Springs. Very sneaky queen move. Right, I think we better look at something from white's perspective, actually. And this one, this is a nice one. So let's come back here. Let's flip the board around and look at it from white's perspective. So pawn here. So bolstering that pawn in the middle. Knight here, knight comes out, knight f3. So normal development from white. And bishop g5, as we've already seen, is a very normal placement. You can also play the bishop out to f4. So it's on a good square, striking down this diagonal. So let's say castles. Now, there are many ways to play this. Pawn to e3 is pretty standard, followed by bishop out. But let's take here. And then play our pawn to e3. And bring the bishop out. This diagonal is very important in the Queen's Gambit. And then queen here, putting pressure on this diagonal. Now, this trap I'm going to show you, it has, as far as I know, it hasn't got a name. So if you've got any suggestions as to what we should call this trap, please stick it in the comments. So black plays the rook here. Very normal, putting it on the semi-open file. Let's get castled. Bit of pressure here. Now, black could play the pawn here, and that could free the knight to move. But here is where we have a very nice move as white. This is good stuff. Knight to b5. This is a wonderful idea. So the threat is to play bishop c7, trapping black's queen. So, yeah, if pawn takes, again, we've got bishop c7. The queen is completely stuck. I don't know what we call this, the squashed queen trap or something, or the trapped queen trap. I don't know. I'm sure you can do better than that. Let me know. Or if, in this position, if black makes room for the queen to move, then, well, of course, there's no point in playing bishop here because the queen can move. But we can play knight here. just forking the rooks and you're going to win material. Very nice. This trap occurs in other settings as well. So for example, instead of queen c2, rook c1, rook e8, a very normal move, castles. And here, if knight h5, wanting to exchange off that bishop, then we play knight takes pawn. Lovely move. If pawn takes, then once again we've got bishop c7 trapping the queen. And if knight takes bishop, knight takes knight, and white is a clear pawn up. There you go. That's a nice one. Let me know if you want to give a name to that one. Okay, and this is the next one I want to show you. Is an oldie but goldie. I've shown this one to you already in another video. The Queen's Gambit accepted, and now you can play e4, you can play knight f3, but I like this move, pawn to e3, a very sneaky move. So we want to just play bishop takes pawn, and if b5, now we undermine that pawn with a4. So if pawn takes pawn, we just get to take this one, and we've damaged black's pawns. And if black wants to try to hold on to this, this is disastrous. Pawn takes pawn, and now queen f3. This is an absolute killer. Nothing can block the path to down to the rook. Well, you can. I mean, the best that black has is to give up a piece. I mean, this is terrible. And after this, black saves the rook. And here I would recommend you just play the queen to a6. Keep the queen active, because after you play knight c3, there's going to be more material on the way, or you might play bishop here and bishop here. Black is still under severe pressure on the queen side, a piece down and with a miserable position. So that's a nice one. Okay, and the final trap, okay, I'm going to flip it around, look at it from black's viewpoint, is in the Albin counter gambit. Now this is very tricky. So pawn takes pawn and pawn to d4, and that rather stymies white's development actually. And very often it's tempting to try to get rid of that pawn straight away with pawn to e3. So many players have fallen into this. e3 is not a good move. Check. That's the tricky move. Bishop d2 blocks, and now pawn takes pawn. And bishop takes bishop. And here is the trick. Pawn takes pawn. Now, of course, if king takes, then you've got queen takes queen. So king e2 hangs on to the queen, but here's the trick. You take that knight. You don't make a queen, you make a knight checking. And if rook takes, then you play bishop g4, check, and you win the queen. Absolutely devastating. And in this position, if king e1, well, now black has 3 knights on the board. Now the best thing to do here, because you still got to be careful actually with black, the very best move is queen check. Reminds me a bit of some traps in the King's Gambit actually. And if g3, then you check on e4 and win that rook in the corner, for example. And if king d2, well, this is absolutely crushing. Black actually has 3 knights on the board. You're a piece up and you've got a devastating attack. And this is absolutely crushing, but great fun. Just to fill in a few details, of course, in this position, white doesn't have to take here, but this is still pretty unpleasant. This check again is really nice. After g3, queen e4 hits the rook in the corner, blocks that, you take, queen e3 check. Just exchange queens. Now material is even, but that's a very weak pawn, and black has wonderful development here. I think odds on you're going to actually win that pawn on e5. It's such a good position for black. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed those evil traps in the Queen's Gambit. Let me know if you've managed to spring one of those on your opponent. And yeah, give me some ideas for names for the ones that I wasn't sure about or didn't know the names of. And if you want to know more about the Queen's Gambit, do check out my Get Started with the Queen's Gambit video. And there are some nice games as well, complete games that show you Queen's Gambit strategy too. Just follow the links down there. Thanks for watching.